it's currently about a week later, and I now have returned with some new pieces of brake. So obviously I've had the rear brake line remade, or brake lines remade. So this is the new flexi hose in the original union, which I had great difficulty getting off. And that is the large 7/16 BSF fitting, which will go into the fixed brake line, the original one, which runs to the front of the car. These ones, however, have been remade in a smaller diameter to suit the new Land Rover short wheelbase cylinders. That'll go on like that. And I've also got some 5/16 nylock nuts to hold them on, because of course the old ones had bolts and were rather bigger. Also at the front, of course, I've had the flexi hoses remade. We actually had to have the banjo bolts specially remachined because we couldn't find any that would fit flush enough to the bolt itself to allow it to clear the trunnion. And you can see the original is quite flat in itself. So that's what's happened, and now I can start at the front and fit the new flexi lines and then work my way to the back. So as you can see, I've now tightened the nylock nuts onto the backing plate, which hold the cylinder in place. The cylinder is nice and free, and I've even got the new Series 1 Land Rover brake shoes on. So I'm now going to fit my new flexi hose with the banjo bolt. As you can see, the machined banjo bolt is nice and shiny and should go on fine. Obviously when you're putting these on, make sure you look at which cylinder is going on which side, because they are handed, and the flexi hoses of course come out the rear side of the cylinder when it's on the car. Alright, well that was a bit painful, but I have now managed to get all of the line completely on, so we now have one completed side of the brakes. Obviously I can now put the drum back on, but I'm going to test it works before I do that. A note for the other side is that always rest the end of the hard line onto the end of the flexi hose before you do the nuts up, because I had to take it off again because I realised I couldn't bend the old steel hard line enough to get it in place onto the new line without some difficulty. So I had to take it off, put it all back on again, which was very irritating. So I'm now going to move on to the other side, which I will do quickly and won't bore you with looking at again. But then I will move on to the back, where I have some more explaining to do. So here we are, of course, at the rear of the car. I have my new hard lines, which were made up here, especially in the smaller size for the new Land Rover cylinder. So that'll go in there like that. Now, as you can see from the backing plate here, the rear has this interesting handbrake mechanism. And if we look at the old cylinder, which came off, you can see that it has these smaller holders for the shoes to go on. So when this was in place, the handbrake mechanism didn't interfere with the movement of the piston. However, of course, on the new ones, they are designed for a Land Rover, which of course has a transmission handbrake. So it goes around the prop shaft effectively. So what we've done is we've ground a little bit off one side, which is the only side required for the handbrake to function. And so now when I pop it on, we should be able to put it on with complete impunity and not worry about it interfering at all, which is the case. As you can see, there is plenty of movement. However, if I were to turn this around, so we're at the wrong end, as you can see, it hits the handbrake mechanism like so. So that was a relatively easy job and didn't require too much difficulty. We just popped it on the grinding wheel and removed a little bit of material from there. So I'm now going to, of course, put this new cylinder on. I'm going to reuse the old washers because I don't see why not, and then I can go back to putting the new hard lines on. Next, of course, comes the rather more unpleasant task of lying under the car and, provided the torch doesn't fall off, of lying under the car and trying to encourage the new flexible line and the T-junction, which should go on there, which will go just onto the bolt, which is completely caked in dirt. Onto there, so hopefully I can manage to fix it back on. There we go now. So that's the offside brake line and the annoying junction and flexi hose in place. That was an unenviable task, putting that thing back on. So now I just need to put the new hose into the new cylinder. Something to note that at the rear, the hose goes in at the front of the cylinder, whereas at the front of the car, it goes in at the rear of the cylinder, which is rather irritating. So I can just put that, hopefully, in there. So that is all of the brakes now done. As you can see, I've put on the new shoes. I'm just comparing the old ones to look at the difference, and they are virtually identical. There's very little difference. This bit is for the extra spring that a Land Rover would have, but the Roadster doesn't seem to bother with it, so I will leave that there and hopefully it won't do any harm. I was just looking at the placement of the spring, and I think the hole for the spring on the Roadster is slightly further up, but there's very little difference, so hopefully it won't change anything that affects the working of the brakes. Obviously we ground this cylinder down as well, and it seems to clear the handbrake absolutely fine. So I think that's enough to be getting on with today, and it's time for a tea break, shall we say.